welcome back to Se Vuelve Podcast. My name is Monica, and this is actually part two. So if you haven't listened to the first episode, I highly recommend you go back, listen to episode one, and then come back to this one. I wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for coming back to listen. The last time I left off, it was a little bit of a cliffhanger. I had already told one of my friends, Christine, that the podcast wasn't going to happen. And then I was in the next phase of having to tell the news to my other friend, Blanca, but that never really happened. And now you're probably thinking, well, I'm here listening to her do this podcast. So what has changed? So there was some time that passed between that situation, but we're going to fast forward. And this is going to go back to last fall of 2023. I'm not really going to go into specifics or names, but there was a situation in which I felt individuals were kind of being silenced. And it made me angry because I felt that it was important to hear everyone's stories. And at that point, I was only hearing like one side of a story being told, and the others weren't. Even if you can't tell, I'm trying to keep this situation kind of private because it isn't my story to be told. That situation ignited a fire in me. I remember sitting down, and in a couple days, I had the podcast name. And if you heard the first episode, I told you that I struggled for years trying to figure out. I sat down and I think I wrote my mission statement in under 3 days. It was so quick. So it was just so interesting that I spent years. I think by that point, we're talking about, I don't know, like 6, 7, 8 years that it took me to figure out a name and a concept. But it really made me reflect why that podcast didn't happen years ago. And if I'm being honest, I don't believe the podcast would have been successful back then. And I'm saying this because in the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time listening to podcasts. Just last year, I think my Spotify Wrap said that I listened to 22,056 minutes of podcast. I've spent a lot of time healing myself and reflecting. There has been a lot of growth within me. Today, you sit with a different version of Monica. And even though I'm still learning and growing, this version of myself is stronger, more confident, and I can say that I found my voice. All right, so I made the decision to launch this podcast last year. So why is this now coming out almost a year later? I will say that it's been a difficult start. So I had a perfect date to release last year at the end of 2023, but with work and other commitments, I wasn't able to release it. Instead, I ended up releasing like a little mini trailer about me launching this podcast. So then when the podcast didn't launch in 2023, I then decided that I was going to launch in March of 2024. That was going to be like my second attempt. But unfortunately, I had a family matter that happened in January, which kind of forced me to really focus on work and focus on like that personal family matter. So then once again, the podcast kind of went on back burner. Another thing that did happen as well that I think, well, not that I think, I know, kind of discouraged me was that I had reached out to somebody about being a future guest, and he was so excited to be a part of it and let me know, like, oh, reach out to my manager and send me an email as well in that thread, letting like all the details about this podcast, right? So I wrote this amazing letter and then just got a rejection email back. And it's totally understandable. The person had other commitments. Also, I knew that I was like a newer podcast. So I knew it was going to be harder to get people. And we're talking about artists. Like this was like an artist, right? To come sit down and like talk with me. After that whole situation, it really left me in a weird position. It was getting to me because now I had like 2 failed attempts to launch this podcast. And then it just made me start to question whether I was going to do this or if I should do this. The control freak in me was trying to hold on so tightly to this version of what I thought things should be, like this perfectionist, right? And essentially that was kind of causing like this block for me being able to release this podcast. That was earlier this year, 2024. And now we're sitting here, July of 2024. I found a new date that was in alignment with my life and things in my personal matters, kind of got better. I heavily believe in divine timing. I believe and I know from experience that things that are meant to be in your life will be in your life. And here we are today. That's the proof. And I say this because there was opportunities that I was gearing up to do that fell out of my life. And it was as if the path was being cleared and I was now able to truly focus and put my energy to doing this, which once again, y'all know I'm a control freak. I made the decision that I would allow the episodes for this podcast to flow. And what I mean by that is that I am trying to be open minded. I'm allowing things to not be perfect, because like I said, I had a vision of what I thought things were going to be. And I'm like, I'm not being strict on time constraints. I'm like, whatever time the story takes, that's fine. As long as I am using my voice to release these episodes because I believe it's important. That's what matters. Sometimes people put these walls up so high up, that it doesn't allow for blessings to come in, right? You're so guarded. You don't let these opportunities come into your life. And I'm making that decision that I'm not blocking any blessings. So let me officially welcome you to Se Vuelve Podcast. In case you're wondering what the name means, Se Vuelve is Spanish for becomes. In the podcast cover, you see a blank between the two words. The blank is filled by the episode title. Sometimes it will be a guest name or topic. So for example, the title of the last two episodes is Your Podcast Host. So Se Vuelve Your Podcast Host. For my non-Spanish speakers, in English it translates to becomes your podcast host. And maybe you're thinking, well, that isn't grammatically correct, but I promise that was intentional. I made the decision by not adding a word before se vuelve, or before becomes in English, because I wanted the title to remain neutral. Sometimes our episodes will have, by association, a they, them, she, he, or if it's a topic, it before the title. Lastly, I wanted to share a couple of reflections upon the launch of this podcast. Who would have thought that that little girl who was out there telling stories, being bold, and script writing would be here today? That creative child was always meant to be a creative and now became a creative adult. I follow this person on TikTok named Laurita, who beautifully says, you grew up into someone who would have protected you as a child. Also, something similar that I've heard is the version you are today as an adult is the adult you would have felt the safest with as a child. I've spent so much time trying to figure out what do I need to do to have passion and purpose in my life. And I'm slowly starting to realize that the things that fulfilled me as a child are now coming back to fulfill me as an adult. And that's all a part of the healing process. I want to end by saying a couple last things. At the end of the day, after things not working out, all the back and forth, all the failed attempts, and how I feel about certain things about myself, the podcast is bigger than those things and insecurities. This is a movement of selflessness because I'm doing this for others, myself, and my inner child. I decided to create this podcast because I believe in the importance of listening to people's stories. They help individuals learn, grow, and evolve. It is important that these conversations or stories are told. There's so much content out there, mostly highlighting the good or the best versions of people's lives. I want to show the raw and the genuine version of people's lives, the ups, the downs, and everything in between. I want to share stories that people can relate to or make them feel seen. Overall, my hope is that the stories or topics that are shared on Se Vuelve Podcast help my listeners walk away with new wisdom and insights and perspectives. I know this story has been a lengthy one, so I am thankful that you listened. I would appreciate if you could leave a review on here and would be grateful if you could let us know what information resonated with you. Please follow me on social media at Se Vuelve Podcast. My personal pages are at Se Vuelve Monica. To officially wrap this up, please join me in welcoming a new episode weekly. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Nos vemos pronto. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.